Entry number 17. Dark, darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps growing. The shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings, negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? Hey guys, Outcast Penguin here. We're gonna skip the intro today. We have a lot to go over and the song just doesn't quite fit the vibes, so let's just get into the theory. What I just read to you is an excerpt from the internal files of Undertale, and it's known as Entry 17. Heavily implied to be written by W.D. Gaster, this entry has been the subject of many questions and theories, but today, I think that ends. The purpose of this entry will almost certainly be revealed here today. If you have always delved deep into the lore of these games, much of this probably won't be a surprise to you, but the conclusions that we will draw from it almost certainly will be. A quick disclaimer, evidence will be drawn from chapters 3 and 4 of both the normal and Snowgrave routes. I know, 2 episodes in a row of spoiler warnings. This one isn't quite as big as last time, but that one was enormous, and this one is just huge. I feel the need to throw the warning out there. If you're planning on seeing this stuff in game, you have been warned. Go now, come back later. Alright, let's start by laying out what the video will solve. It's a lot, so hang tight. It will discuss what Entry 17 is even talking about in the first place, including who's speaking, who's being spoken to, and by the way, it isn't who you think it is, and what is being spoken about. It will go over the identity of the Roaring Knight, what their motivations are, what Chris's involvement in their plot is, where the human soul we control came from, who they were, and why they are in Chris. It will discuss why Asgore was kicked out from the police sanction, and why he and Toriel got divorced, what happened to Des, and why Chapter 1 seems to focus on choices not mattering when later chapters seem to imply that they most certainly do. Yeah, sorry editor, we're in for a long one. Let's start with Entry 17. It has been widely accepted for many years that W.D. Gaster is the one who wrote this entry, and this theory will not challenge that. Gaster's theme, found in Undertale's secret sound test, is a song that plays for 17 seconds before kicking you out, subtly implying a connection between Gaster and the number 17. As far as I know, 17 isn't a very notable number for any reason other than its connection to this entry itself. It isn't like 666, the other number associated with Gaster, which is so rife with religious and occultist meaning in real life that I'm not going to get into it. This video is going to be long enough as it is. Just know Gaster's theme is 17 seconds long, and that's enough for me to put him in as the speaker for Entry 17. It's not all we have, but it's enough. Through Entry 17, Gaster was talking about something that even the best theorists back in the day wouldn't have had a proper guess about. Dark, darker, yet darker, photon readings negative? At the time, we didn't understand what that meant, but Chapter 3 of Deltarune has definitively cleared this up for us. When Susie invites Ralsei to the festival that will presumably happen in Chapter 5, Ralsei tells you that, though he may wish to, he literally can't come with you. He tells you that Darkners, without the influence of a dark fountain, are not real people. They're just objects. This has been theorized since Chapter 1, so it probably isn't a shock to you. What may have been more of a shock is what the dark fountains themselves actually are. A dark fountain is what happens when darkness empties all light from a space before going into negatives. As light leaves a room, Ralsei explains, the objects begin to look more alive. A chair might look like a monster, or a poster might seem to move. When the room gets darker, you begin to lose the ability to observe reality at all. But when darkness begins to remove the light even further, that ability to observe the world is restored, though the world, in a way, is not. This is a dark fountain, a place where photon readings come up negative, objects come to life, and seemingly empty rooms become worlds full to the brim. This is what Gaster's experiment was about. He and the others with him were creating a dark fountain. And how does one create a dark fountain? As of Chapter 2, we now know the means by which a person could do such a thing. It comes by means of determination. Queen tells us at the end of Chapter 2 that the Knight created the dark fountain by funneling their determination into their knife and plunging it into the ground. That Knight almost certainly was Chris, as the colors of the Dark Worlds in Chapters 1, 2, and 3, and the main one in Chapter 4 are all the same, but they're not the same as Susie's Dark World in Chapter 4. Despite the fact that Chris likely created all of the main fountains, they are also confirmed not to be the Roaring Knight. We see both Chris and the Roaring Knight in the same place in both of the new chapters, and I'll get into that a bit more in a little while. But for now, know that the Dark Fountains are made using determination. Determination is an intensely important concept in Deltarune's predecessor, Undertale. We learn throughout the two major runs of the game, the pacifist and genocide routes, that determination is a power wielded only by humans and monsters that have absorbed human souls. It's what allows human souls to persist after death, whereas monster souls, which lack determination, do not. And yet in Deltarune, we see that the monsters of this world must have determination. Not only is Susie able to create a dark fountain in Chapter 4, but it seems likely that in Chapter 2, Birdly would also be capable of this. Not only that, but we have evidence now that monster souls persist after death in this world. In Chapter 4, we meet an old turtle in the Dark World, and he tells us his name is Gerson. If you talked to the Reverend and read the gravestones in Chapters 1 and 2, you would know that Gerson is the father of the Reverend leading the town's church, and that he died long before the start of the game. This should mean that his soul is gone, and while that is still technically possible, I don't think this is the case. Gerson is here in the Dark World as a result of the Dark Fountain animating an object that the Reverend keeps in his desk. It's essentially an urn that holds a photo, a hammer, and the dust that Gerson would have crumbled into upon death. This means it's possible that the Gerson we meet in the Dark World is just another object being animated by the Dark Fountain. But again, I don't think it's just that. He writes a letter to the Reverend, coaches Susie, and helps you fight the final boss of this section by using moves similar to Susie. Objects animated by the Dark Fountains do seem to care about Lightners, but with the themes of moving on that this chapter presents, and the wisdom that he shows, and the fun that he has, the way he isn't clinging to existence the way that most Darkners seem to, and the fact that he can recruit Darkners to his own cause, it just seems like he isn't a normal Darkner himself. In addition, we also have Susie making a Dark World, and if you ask me, it seems like this is a clue. Monsters in this world have determination, and they have had it for a while now. And yet, they must not have always had it. Notice the others in the graveyard. They belong to Deltarune's version of the Amalgamates. The Amalgamates were monsters in Undertale who had fallen down. We learn in the True Lab entries that Alphys used monsters who were in a state of near death, referred to as fallen down. She used these essentially comatose individuals as subjects in her experiments with determination, and these experiments allowed these individuals to persist when they should have died, though they were melted, twisted, and nearly destroyed as a result of these experiments, turned into sad, terrifying chimera. This is what determination does to a monster, and yet, it isn't all. We have two examples in Undertale of monsters who get their hands on determination without dying, without fusing, and in both cases, it allows the individual to persist when they ought to be dead. Those two cases are Undyne the Undying and Flowey. Flowey is particularly notable, as he absorbs one or more human souls on multiple occasions, and even this is not enough to save him from death, as he is killed after his first attempt. What does save him, what does allow him to continue, is determination, derived from the human souls captured by Asgore and funneled through the DT extraction machine and onto a flower from Asgore's garden. one which was coated with Azrael's dust and which grows atop Kara's body. This flower, after being given determination, would eventually become Flowey, and we learn this in entry 18, the one, notably, that follows directly after entry 17. Now, it's important also to note that there are two entry 17s. The first was in the game until version 1.5, and it reads, "Monsters' physical forms can't handle determination like humans can. With too much determination, our bodies begin to break down. Everyone's melted together." After version 1.5, it becomes the entry 17 that we know and love today. Some very major things have happened here, as both entry 17s were and have always been unused in Undertale, existing only in hidden game files. One of those somethings is that the Amalgamate's bodies, which have fully recovered, began to melt after Asgore removed human souls and took them back to the castle as described in entry 15. The other is that Gaster underwent his Dark Fountain experiment. That said, I think that the Gaster mentioned here and the Dark Fountain experiment did not take place in Undertale. It happened in Deltarune. Think about it. We have two entry 17s, one of which is almost certainly written by Alphys. Alphys writes every other entry in the True Lab. I know that there are theories that say it was Sans who wrote the original 17 and onward, but I personally disagree. I think the lowercase letters just show a mental shift is taking place in Alphys. It may still be true, but I'm not gonna get into it, and I will be operating under the assumption it was Alphys, not Sans. If Alphys wrote all of the entries before and after 17, and also wrote one of the two versions of entry 17, then how could this world's version of Gaster write the more famous entry? Alphys mentions that they need a lot of power to make any of this work, which suggests that this would be the time Gaster was working on the core, a machine which he would have fallen into, shattering him across dimensions and killing him as we learn from his followers. If he was writing in the True Lab, why do we have two entry 17s? And if he wasn't, if it was that he was working in the core, then why is he there with two other individuals, one of which we would have assumed to be Alphys and the other we would assume to be Sans? It may seem weird that I bring up Sans here, but Sans is, as we can see from the back room of his apartment complex or house or whatever it is, that he is a scientist himself. He has some kind of machine hidden back here, a photo of him and a few other individuals. Not a lot of it makes sense to us yet. But regardless, we know he's a scientist. So if he's a scientist and Alphys is a scientist, it makes sense that these two would be the individuals he's talking to. But does it really make sense for Alphys and Sans to be currently at the core? Entry 16 shows that Alphys' own experiment is already in shambles. Her time would have to be spent in the True Lab right now, and entry 17 shows that it is. Her version of 17, that is. So why is this other entry 17 here, and what is it really all about? I think that this version of entry 17 is talking about an experiment undergone in Deltarune's shelter. One major point against this entry being made in Undertale's universe is that we don't see a Dark Fountain, even though we've clearly established one was made during entry 17. Maybe it was made and closed in an uneventful manner, but that seems dubious. This would have to be a huge deal, wouldn't it? I mean, one that would purposefully or otherwise garner a lot of attention. We don't have enough evidence from Undertale outside of the followers, who we will get into in a bit, to suggest something this big has happened. But we do in Deltarune. First and foremost, let's lay down some facts. Fact number 1. Both Muse.Smile and Gaster's theme are associated with Gaster, and both are found all over Deltarune. His theme shows up as leitmotifs in the first chapter's Dark World and Overworld music, in Jevel's theme, and in the character creator music. Muse.Smile appears in several locations as well, including the garbage noises that play when you use your phone in the Dark World, and that are mentioned as being heard by the Addisons outside Spamton's shop after you beat him. And very, very notably, outside the shelter, A shelter that Chris is scared of, a shelter that Noelle, Chris, Azriel, and Des explored when they weren't supposed to, a shelter kept lock and key by the mayor, the police, and another individual associated with the Deltarune, and a shelter that has a dark fountain within, one which the Roaring Knight is working with Chris to keep the player and Susie from reaching. We see in Chapter 4 that, for some reason, either Des or somebody closely related to her knew part of the code, which starts with 122 and is written in her guitar. We can see that Chris knows the whole code, as they use it at the end of Chapter 3 to enter the shelter. We see that they are in cahoots with someone who is trying to keep others out of the shelter, and who can see you in the kitchen with Chris when you are moving around Noelle's house as a disembodied soul. You might have not seen it on your playthrough, but I sure did. If you leave the safety of the vents and journey into the room while Chris is on the phone, you can get right up in his face and he won't do anything. His gaze will follow you, but he won't make a move until the voice on the phone tells him to get the soul. Let me tell you, my soul almost jumped out of my body in real life. Whatever happened in the shelter, it was known by Chris, and it is known by the mayor, and likely created a dark fountain which remains to this day. And it likely also had something to do with Christmas, as the portion of the code that we see in the guitar, 122, is just one number off from 1225, the date of that holy night, and notably a code that we see while walking with Noelle in Chapter 2, which takes place in a dark world centered primarily around her. Here, she tells you about the fun times that Chris used to have with her, and Des, and Azriel. She mentions going down into the shelter, a place that, if you visit it in that chapter, 2 classmates are trying to break into, and they mention something bad took place down there. Something to do with Chris. What happened? Well, I for one think it has something to do with every single problem that this idyllic town has. You've already probably gathered this by now, but I think that the version of Gaster that wrote Entry 17 used to live in this town. And what happened is that he used a human soul, our human soul, to create a dark fountain. I think that while he was making it, he was interrupted by meddling kids, unaware that their lives would be ruined from this day forward, as an accident would lead one child disappearing in the dark world, one having another soul possess them, and all of the remaining survivors going their separate ways, unable to talk about what just happened. Because every child involved had a parent involved as well, a parent that told them to keep quiet about it. I think that the 2 individuals brought up in Entry 17 are the Mayor, Carol, and Police Chief Asgore. In Chapters 3 and 4, we can see that Carol is the reason Asgore is able to make enough money to eat, the reason he can keep his flower shop open, even without selling any flowers. We see that Toriel is disenfranchised with Carol for helping Asgore in a situation so heinous or personal that she won't even mention what it was. We see that Asgore cleans her house and is working with her or someone else to show everyone that what he did, presumably what got him kicked from the force, was a good thing. And perhaps the most terrifying thing we can learn in this chapter, we see that Asgore is in possession of a shadow crystal, as we see in his dialogue in the bathroom and hallway scenes. He says, "Whew, cleaning up sure works up an appetite. I wonder if the kitchen has any treats for me." No, not now. I can't afford to take a break. No, more than ever, I need to concentrate. To settle this once and for all, I've got to go look again. And then later, in the hallway, we're almost there, aren't we, old friend? This time, for sure, Tori will finally see what really happened. That I just wanted to protect everyone. And this time, she'll have to believe me. They all will. Then, we'll all be a happy family again, won't we? It sure is beautiful, isn't it? This black shard. Okay, what do we learn from this? First, Asgore was kicked from the squad for something he did intentionally to help everyone, but that everyone, especially Toril, but likely not Carol, holds against him. Carol likely knows about it, as we can see from Toriel's line about how awful it is that she keeps helping him even after whatever it was. This would imply that at very least, Toriel thinks that Carol knows what was going on, but Carol isn't doing anything about it. We can also see that Asgore and at least one other individual are complicit in this act, and that they are both aware of a small black shard in Asgore's possession that has something to do with the conversation that they are presently having. A small footnote here as well, Asgore isn't the only one making sketchy phone calls in these chapters. Chris receives a call from the same person that they talk to in the kitchen. They say, "Chris, don't forget, Chris. You promised." We won't be talking about this yet, but remember it. I know we're jumping around a lot and this might seem a little bit flighty, but this will be very important later, so keep it in mind. This is heavy theory territory, but I think that Gaster was experimenting with the powers of determination just like Alphys. And just like Alphys, it went horribly, horribly wrong. As Gaster studied determination, he found it had the power to give monsters a life beyond what should be their death. In order to further his research on determination, he would need to get his hands on a human soul, one which he procured by the only means that could possibly exist. He must have removed a soul from a living human being. Perhaps as a part of a missing persons case, Asgore got involved and followed Gaster to the shelter. He found the experiment, the dead human body, the horrible machine that could remove a person's soul, and yet, perhaps convinced by Gaster that this would save so many more souls, monster souls, than it would lose, Asgore turned a blind eye. But Asgore had been hot on the trail, and the people wanted answers. Where had the human child gone? The Mayor Carol got involved. She initially wanted answers just like the rest of the town. Though he didn't have the guts to let the townsfolk in on it, Asgore trusted her. She was a close family friend after all, and she was practical, calculating. Certainly she would get it. He introduced her to the experiment, and she too became complicit in the crime. All the while, Gaster continued his experiment. He learned that not only could determination save lives, it could create them. By creating a dark fountain, objects with no life and beings with no souls could begin to act and think like rational, intelligent beings. Worlds could be created and sustained, and all one had to give up for this was a single soul. And that was when everything went south. One day, the door burst open and 4 playful children, unaware of what was going on in the room, burst through the door and the experiment went awry. The soul, being used and abused, saw a chance to escape. It entered Chris, and the experiment became unstable. The fountain, out of control, sucked in both Gaster and one of the kids. Gaster was killed in the disaster, shattered across dimensions. But the poor innocent child was sucked into the dark world, and one of the other children promised that they would get them out. The mayor, fearing a PR nightmare, snuck out before they could be found out. I believe that Des was sucked into the dark fountain that day, and now everything was out in the open. Asgore knew what was going on, and he was even there when it happened, but he did nothing to stop it. When the people of the town found out about the disappearance of Des and the human child that he was supposed to find and save, he was stripped of his position as police chief. The mayor escaped without being found out, but her daughter had been taken by the fountain, and when things had settled down, she made her way into the fountain herself. She had to know. She had to see for herself what had happened to her daughter, and what she found was horrific. Des wasn't Des anymore. She had been turned, twisted, perhaps by the fountain, or perhaps as a result of the massive amounts of determination entering both her and Gaster, potentially fusing her and him as both of them melted, becoming a terrifying creature made of darkness whose only familiar feature was 2 antlers on the sides of her head. Des had become the Roaring Night. Carol couldn't let this get out, but she needed to find a way to save her daughter. She locked up the shelter to keep anyone else from getting in and to keep Des from getting out. and she and Asgore worked to find a way to fix what had been broken. Carol lost herself in her work, forgetting and abandoning everything that she cared about in a single-minded determination to get her lost daughter back. And though no one could have predicted it, the experiment that Gaster had begun that day had worked. His experiment granted the monsters of the town determination, so long as the fountain remained open. With small doses of it, constantly seeping into the real world through the shelter doors and up through the ground, the monsters of this town became immune to its melting effects, and it eventually integrated itself into them, to such a degree that anyone, any person or monster in this town could make a dark fountain of their own. And as time went on, and days turned into weeks, months, and years, the human soul in Chris regained its own power, as it dreamt of who it once was. The song now residing in Chris once belonged to someone else, and I believe it was the avatar that we created at the beginning of the game. As I mentioned earlier, the song playing here uses Gaster's leitmotif. The dialogue here is also in all caps, just like it is in Entry 17. I think the voice that you are hearing in this section, the voice speaking to you as an appearance and name are chosen, is Gaster's. And when we finish, the voice tells us that though this creation is good, we must now throw it away. We can't choose who we are in this world. We are now Chris. And yet, if we choose to name ourselves Chris, we are told that this is, quote, an interesting coincidence. We may not be Chris. Perhaps our name coincides if we choose for it to, but Chris is a separate entity, one we simply fill the shoes of. This doesn't mean that our name is lost or forgotten, though. In the My Town section of the game, the town is already named not after Chris, but after your creation. And the prophecy of Chapter 4, once again, is not about Chris, it's about the caged human soul. Though no one knows it, we have been unwillingly inserted into this narrative. Who we were before is inconsequential. To everyone around us, this person we made to be our avatar no longer exists. We are forced to be Chris now. But that person, that entity that we made to put our shoes into is still a part of this story, even if our soul no longer pilots the body. So then, what is Chris's role? The end of chapters 1 and 2 make it look like they were the Roaring Knight, but we now know that that isn't true. The Roaring Knight is a separate entity who kidnaps Undyne and runs through the light world to the shelter, which opens for Chris once Susie is gone. Chris and the Knight are in cahoots. But to what end? Well, whatever end it isn't meant to hurt everyone in the town. Though Chris certainly gives off malicious vibes, if you play through the Snowgrave route, Chris visits Noelle that night. They comfort her, say that Birdley will recover and tell her that it was all a dream. If you decide to take over and tell her that it wasn't a dream, and force her to wear the thorn ring again, Chris will take you, the human soul, to the bathroom, throw you in a trash can, and begin violently kicking it. This is objectively terrifying, but it shows us that they are clearly protective of Noelle. They are pissed about what you've done, and what you are doing to her, and rightly so. You've been downright horrifying. When Chris met with Noelle that night, she said it was the first time in a long time that she had heard their voice, their mumbly, weird voice. There's a distinction here between us and Chris that even the in-game characters recognize. And though Chris looks terrifying and acts with all of the hallmarks of a terribly off-kilter character, they still want what's best for those they care about. So then that begs the question, why all the malicious vibes? Well, they may not be a bad person, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're a good person either. They care about Noelle, and I believe that they would care about Des and many of the other citizens as well, and for reasons we don't yet know, if Des is the Roaring Knight, she's trying to open the fountains and release the Titans who will tear the world apart. I think Des wants revenge. Maybe not on Gaster, maybe not on everyone, but almost certainly on her mother. We can see that Mayor Carol runs a tight ship in her house, one that Des never quite fit in with. And yet, Mayor Carol clearly allows all kinds of corruption, something that Des has not only seen, but also personally been hurt by. Des has been transformed and disfigured as a result of her mother's neglect of, and perhaps even involvement in, Gaster's experiment. And now, Des is being kept away from the world by that same mother. Maybe Chris promised to free her. Maybe they promised to get Carol, or maybe they promised to merge the worlds of light and dark so that Des can once again live among those that she knows and loves. But whatever the case may be, we as the heroes in this story are closing the dark fountains and are unknowingly thus working towards an end that would see Des and Ralsei disappear, as dark fountains all close and peace is restored, just like we see in the prophecies of chapter 4. Chris does not want that. They will do everything in their power to put a stop to it. And though it's only theories for the moment, I'm positive that as the story continues, we will learn more about what both Chris and Des are definitively after. As a final piece of evidence from Deltarune, I want to draw everyone back to the song that plays at the end of chapter 1. The song, titled Don't Forget, is as follows.
When the light is running low and the shadows start to grow and the places that you know seem like fantasy, there's a light inside your soul that's still shining in the cold with the truth, the promise in our hearts. Don't forget, I'm with you in the dark.
Those last couple lines of the song are referenced in the phone call at the end of chapter 4, the one between who we would assume to be Chris and the Dark Knight, the roaring Knight. The song, which is notably sung by someone with a young, feminine voice, must be sung by someone that we know. Personally, I think it can't be anyone other than Des. The song ends with the lines, "There's a light inside your soul that's still shining in the cold with the truth, the promise in our hearts. Don't forget, I'm with you in the dark." The mentions of the cold, the dark, a promise, and that line that has always stuck out to me, don't forget. They all seem to converge on either Noelle or Des. But we know that it can't be Noelle. When Chris is on the phone with the same individual in the kitchen, Noelle is visibly in the other room talking to Susie, and no one else in the game is a young girl associated with the cold, dark fountains, and promises made between them and Chris long ago. The person on the phone, and the one singing this song, has to be Des. Now, we'll be leaving Deltarune and heading back to Undertale for one last note about Gaster's followers before we go. The Gaster followers are NPC in Undertale who tell us about Gaster. They tell us that he was the royal scientist before Alphys, and that he built the core, that he was shattered across dimensions, and that he is dead. And yet, that he's also still watching us. If Gaster was the royal scientist before Alphys, how could he have been from Deltarune instead of Undertale? Perhaps the machine that he fell into, shattering him across dimensions, wasn't the core, and perhaps it was only one of his shattered pieces that was the royal scientist. Perhaps the Gaster here was a different Gaster from the one in Entry 17. Perhaps the core that they are referring to is a different core. I'm not sure how it all fits, but I do think it's notable that at least one of the Gaster followers is from Deltarune as well. This one here is called Clam Girl, and she tells you all about her neighbor Susie. We never meet a Susie in Undertale, but we do in Deltarune. And before anyone says, oh, maybe it's just a different Susie that was off screen, there was an update to Undertale a week before Deltarune was announced. And among other small changes, one change made to this character specifically is that for this short period, if you talk to her after beating the game, she will turn gray and tell you that you will meet Susie very, very soon before disappearing. The Susie that she is talking about is almost certainly the Susie that we met in Deltarune a week after this change was made. Perhaps the other followers are from Deltarune as well. They're all capable of disappearing, just like Clam Girl and Gaster himself. If you believe the mystery man to be Gaster, which, I mean, like, come on, yeah, that's him. Being in grayscale is also a good hint of this. As one appears more monochromatic, the darker they and their surroundings are. Perhaps they too got here through a dark fountain, and the darkness continues to stick to them, masking them in shades of gray and at times hiding them from sight. It's almost a foregone conclusion in my mind at least that Deltarune is what Toby Fox was planning for Gaster all along, and if that's true, then that would also be the case for his followers. In my mind, all that truly remains to be seen is to what extent Gaster continues to affect the story. Perhaps the part that he has to play in this story is already done, and he will remain an enigmatic figure tied to the lore, but seen only through hints and clues. Or perhaps he waits in the shadows, waiting for us to finally open the shelter doors and release him and his experiment to fully consume the world of light and integrate it into the shadows that he has fallen into. But what do you guys think? Is Gaster from Deltarune? Are the two people in entry 17 Carol and Asgore? And is Des the Roaring Knight? Let me know what you think in the comments, and hey, maybe share this with your Deltarune and Undertale friends. I really think that I'm onto something here, and I think everyone deserves to know what's going on. Next week, we'll continue with the Zelda Theory video, and hopefully the week after we'll have the Undertale Asgore leitmotif video ready to go. But until then, this is Outcast Penguin, signing off.